So, continuing with my analysis on AI and strategy, I've been out of the game for a couple months, things going on, but getting back to it, talking about artificial intelligence is moving from a technology conversation into a strategy conversation. So, the central challenge for a company is not simply choosing a model or launching a pilot or automating a task. It is really about deciding where AI changes the economics of competition and the value that customers expect and the capabilities an organization must build to meet those value expectations. So this presentation aims to use familiar strategic frameworks to bring discipline to that challenge. So the technologies, of course, are new, but the questions are enduring. So where is value shifting? What is becoming easier to copy because of AI and capabilities around AI? What does a company need to protect? What do they need to redesign or test? And the goal here is to turn uncertainty into informed business decisions. So let's get on with it. So let's first remember that adoption and impact are not the same thing. Just about every organization now uses AI, but only a small fraction report a meaningful financial impact. The difference is not simply better technology, of course, that's important, but high performers are more likely to redesign their workflows rather than just bolt on some automation onto existing tasks. So at the same time, frontier innovation is increasingly shaped by industry and capabilities are moving ahead quickly. So that creates a moving target for every business leadership team. So the strategic task is to move beyond hype, of course, and all this scattered experimentation that companies are doing um, toward a clearer view of where AI can create measurable, defendable business value. So, looking at various strategic frameworks to help us build out the AI capabilities, this is our master map for moving from external signaling and cosmetic projects to actual strategic action. So, we begin with the pestles to scan the environment, looking at policy, economics, technology, social change, and regulation. We also look at the five forces, see how that helps us understand how AI redistributes power across an industry. There's the value chain analysis and identifying where economics can change inside the firm. Rio helps us separate widely available technology from competitive advantages. Jobs to be done, business model logic, clarify customer value and value capture. 7S framework, of course, we have to have that in there as well. Test organizational readiness and scenarios, pressure test choices. The output is not just a strategic AI roadmap. It is prioritized portfolio of hypotheses, no regret moves, and contingent opportunities and big bets that companies can take to move forward. So first, we're looking at PESTLE, and which is a framework that helps business leaders look beyond the model itself and see the environment surrounding it and understand what are the benefits and disadvantages of the situation that the company finds itself in. So, starting politically, industrial policy, public procurement, and export controls, things like this can shape access and advantage. Economically, compute prices, labor substitution, and infrastructure investment affect the business case, to be sure. Socially, we have trust, ethics, workforce expectations, and skill norms, which determine the ability of a company to adopt the technology. Technologically, there are agentic workflows, multimodality, open source alternatives, interoperability, and cybersecurity. All of these can change very quickly. Environmental questions include things like energy use and supply chain impact. And finally, legally, we're looking at intellectual property and the risks associated with that. Accountability and transparency are becoming central considerations for businesses as they continue their AI journey. The practical exercise is simple here. It's to identify developments with both high impact and high uncertainty, then translate each of these into a strategic implication. Looking at Porter's five forces, the most classic of the framework, it continues to be useful because, of course, AI changes who has leverage, which barriers rise and fall, and where profit margins migrate within the industry. So rivalry intensifies when competitors can imitate features and shorten innovation cycles. Entry becomes easier with cloud models and tools, AI tools reduce technical barriers, but harder where trust, brand, or data and compliance are more important. Um, then we have supplier power, which can increase when firms depend on a narrow set of model vendors, whether they're cloud providers or chip makers, things like that. Buyer power rises as AI lowers search and comparison costs. And then substitutes become more powerful when AI native agents replace entire workflows rather than just individual products. So the key question is always who gains the bargaining power out of this new system. So we'll go into this in a little detail. So for example, North Star Advisory, which is a mid-market professional services firm, looking at rapid commoditization of basic analysis, something that a lot of companies around the world are starting to struggle with. How do we go beyond the commoditization of analysis that is now essentially happening with AI? So new entrants, of course, are mixed threat. Research, drafting are easier to offer, but trusted, regulated, and high stakes advisory services remain quite difficult to replicate. So rivalry rises because turnaround times compress and features are then copied faster. So supplier power rises as firms rely on model vendors, platforms, and specialized talent. Buyers gain power because they can self serve routine work and compare providers more easily. When it comes to, okay, substitutes grow as client teams use AI internally. And in this case, North Star's response could be strategic, which is to sell outcomes rather than hours and encode proprietary methods into the development of their analysis, strengthen the trusted review, which is a key part of their premium, their value proposition, and then of course to build client data loops and to partner very selectively. So these are just examples of how a company can help to maintain its competitive differentiation with the fact that every other company in the market is also using AI and can now more easily do all of those tasks that a company like Northstar would be able to do well, but it was more difficult for other companies to do it. Now they can do it. So then looking at okay, take for example the value chain analysis where AI really changes the economics of the ecosystem. So value chain analysis can shift the conversation from where can we use AI to where does AI change our fundamental economics. So there are different views on this. First, is to automate repetitive work to reduce manual effort and cycle time. Okay, this is one of the basic things that AI helps companies do is just become more efficient in terms of timing. Second is to augment people with better information and judgment support and throughput. So AI can take from a larger body of information, synthesize that, summarize it, give it to the actual people on the ground who are doing the work, and help them make better decisions as a result. So the third is here that we have here is reconfigure the workflow itself by changing the handoffs or the sequencing and the decision rights, and all of this is highly critical to maintaining optimal value in the new AI system. So companies that don't reconsider their workflows are really losing out on a major part of the value creation opportunity that AI brings. Fourth is invent new activities, services, or data loops that were previously not possible to do from an economic or from a logistical standpoint. So this is all about bringing new value to market. So across the enterprise, AI can affect infrastructure, of course, talent, technology, development, procurement, all these operations, logistics, sales, and services. So in this way, the greatest gains often come not from faster tasks, but from a completely redesigned system of work. So again, going a bit further in the value chain analysis, this slide we look at trying to make it more concrete in terms of what it actually means for a business. So imagine a workflow that moves from intake and classification to retrieval, proposal, approval, response, and learning. In the old design, AI is inserted into isolated tasks while the linear process remains intact. Handoffs continue, of course, and cues from around human approvals and legacy constraints can limit the gains from the new AI systems. But in the redesigned model, routine cases move through a machine-led flow. So while people focus on exceptions, oversight, and audit of the process and the output, retrieval, proposal, and response become a connected loop. So every interaction generates learning data. So the message here is important. Value comes from removing the cues and the handoffs, not just from speeding up individual steps. So then we look at the RIO framework, where we're looking at distinguishing access from advantage. So RIO asks whether a resource is valuable, rare, difficult to imitate, and organized for capture. So this framework oftentimes helps prevent a common mistake, confusing access to AI with an actual durable advantage. So foundation model APIs, public benchmarks, open source models, standard productivity tools, and off-the-shelf SaaS these are all widely accessible to companies. They can improve performance, but they usually create competitive parity rather than a moat. If one business has access to it, so does every other business. So sustainable advantage is more likely to come from distinctive interaction data, hard-won domain expertise, in other words, looking at the core competency of an organization, trusted workflows, learning loops, organization built to exploit them is where it all comes together. So a company needs to ask four questions under this approach. Does the capability create value? Is it rare? Can competitors copy it? And are talent, governance, and architecture all aligned around this approach or this strategy? So here we're looking at jobs to be done and to understand the customer intent. So this approach tries to reframe products around the progress customers are trying to make. So customers don't simply buy a report or an answer or a service or a piece of content. They hire a solution to decide, uh, for example, before a deadline, to restore a service or maintain a content pipeline, whatever it is that they're looking for, they're hiring for this service. So this distinction quite matters because AI can improve a feature while missing the actual customer job and what it is that the customer wants. So for a company looking at this, and that is service heavy in this particular case, so start by asking what functional and emotional outcomes really matter to the customer. What kind of friction prevents switching, and whether AI enables a fundamentally better solution or customer experience. So this opportunity is not just speed; it may be better confidence, convenience, quality, trustability, personalization, all these factors go into it. Whatever it is to make a new way make progress from the customer standpoint. So I think in some ways as well, looking at the customer logic or seeing it from a customer framework is of course important, and it also goes hand in hand with understanding the business model logic, so the value creation, delivery, and the capture. So AI can certainly lower production costs, particularly in some areas. Whether it does overall is a different question. But lower costs alone don't just guarantee higher profits. The business model logic forces business owners, business strategists to ask how value is created, how it's delivered, and ultimately captured. So, in the value proposition, we consider outcomes that become newly possible or more reliable. So, in activities and resources, the business needs to decide what should be automated and where human judgment remains strategically important. In revenue and cost, test whether or not pricing should shift towards outcomes or risk sharing while balancing compute expenses against labor savings. In customer channels, customer self-service, personalization, and embedded distribution through agents are quite typical strategies. And finally, looking at partners and defensibility. So sustainable returns depend on bargaining power, proprietary data, workflow integration, trust, and strategic positioning. So of course we have to look at the organization as a whole to make sure that the organization is aligned to AI and ready for AI execution. That's where the 7S framework comes into play, providing a more practical readiness assessment. And in this case, so we start out with strategy. We'll go through this very quickly. I think the 7S framework is pretty well understood across the board, but it is a useful uh, set of categories through which to analyze the organization, starting out with strategy, which requires, of course, explicit value creation approach, and make sure that the implementation of AI is not just a disconnected backlog of use cases and disjointed parts. Okay, so that's the strategy. The structure itself requires a clear ownership across the business, and of course that applies to AI, the systems, the processes, the data, to make sure someone specific is responsible. That's a key part of AI governance as well. So we're looking at structure. Then the systems, of course, need to support evaluation, monitoring, security, and learning along the way so that the system itself gets better over time. Skills include data literacy across the organization, I mean, domain knowledge, and process redesign. Looking at staff considerations include role transitions and talent models. Leadership style matters very much because leaders need to model the use cases, set ambitions and targets, and understand the evidence behind demand projections and how that's going to be applied. So shared values also anchor responsible AI. So a business needs to score each of these dimensions, let's say on a 1 to 5 scale, and then of course looking at the bottlenecks, which areas are weakness, and which areas do we really need to focus our attention on. So scenario planning is a key function of the strategy team, and it helps an organization understand what are the implications of the activities that they're doing now, implementation, AI, new systems, all that. What is going to be the result, and what kind of risks are we going to have to consider along the way? In this case, scenario planning is not about just predicting one future correctly. It's about building strategies and supporting the strategic development process and ensuring those strategies are sensible across the, as we say, foreseeable future. So we start with a focal decision and let's say a 3 to 5 year time horizon. So then the idea is for to isolate a few uncertainties that would be high impact and genuinely unpredictable. So in this approach, there are two axes that show number one is the pace of AI capability improvement on the horizontal, and the degree of regulatory and customer permission, or we could say customer acceptance on the vertical. So coming together, they create four different possibilities as an outcome. So you have a protected fortress, slow burn, a new paradigm where the customer acceptance is very high, and the capability or the implementation of that is also very high. So you're looking at a completely new situation. And then the Wild West. So I'm not going to spend the time right now to go through each of these, but this I think is a very useful framework to test if there is no regret movement, no regret initiative that's being taken up, and to look at whether or not these new initiatives might be contingent on some other factors of success in different parts of the organization or contingent upon regulatory success. In other words, identifying what is the core problem here. Is it going to be the market or regulatory acceptance, or is it going to be our organization's own capabilities in implementing this? So AI can be impressive and unreliable at the same time, and this kind of analysis brings that out very clearly. So looking at all these frameworks is very helpful in understanding the situation and the opportunities and how these could play out. Now a company has to put it all together. So what's here's a tip that could be done in all different timeframes and depending on the situation. But here is an example of a 90-day strategic cycle, which follows along with most companies doing their reports or quarterly strategic reviews. So the AI strategy itself can operate on a 90-day. It's also a learning cycle, right? Strategic team will look at the results from the previous quarter, apply lessons learned, and then move forward. So what would that cycle look like? Let's take it in this way. And here's there are many different ways to do it, but in the first 2 weeks, let's say days 1 to 15, that's about framing and scoping. So understanding the situation, scanning the external environment, understanding what the market is doing, where things are moving, understanding the baseline economics, and identifying the value creation opportunities that may be emerging. The next is looking at it from an analytical perspective, from let's say that weeks 3 to 6 in that sort of time frame, looking at the situation, understanding what is the five forces telling us about the market. What about value chain mapping? What about REAL? Applying all these frameworks, and which framework will depend on the company and the situation. But in any case, any framework is going to be helpful in moving the conversation forward and in challenging the executive team to think deeper about what are the opportunities, what is the data in the market trying to tell us about what we should be doing next. So in the next phase, then it's about building scenarios, identifying those no regret option and opportunities, and to look at the organizational readiness and define what it is that the management team thinks is the hypothesis for the next cycle. What should we be doing, and what do we expect to happen as a result of that? Then the company can look at controlled pilots and looking at what are the leading indicators and what is the potential points of failure in this process, and testing the process, testing the new tool, for example, AI tool or strategic approach or customer service, whatever the case may be, testing it in this short-term time frame, and then in the final phase to compare evidence to the hypotheses that were developed in the second phase to understand what are differences, or what are differences between the hypotheses and the actual result, what's going to be needed to scale this up, what's going to be needed to change within the organization, and what are the next steps we need to do to roll this out. So in this way, the process here creates a living strategy for the company to execute and enhance, in this case, a quarterly basis. And so it's not just a one-time roadmap, it's a living, breathing kind of exercise. So that cycle that we just went through, in this case, a 90-day strategic cycle, is an example of the kind of process that companies can go through in many cases to help ensure that they don't fall into a trap of, in this case, for example, the first trap is looking at AI as its standalone initiative. It's part of the entire organization, and it should be considered, the impact should be considered across the board. So having that 90-day cycle that we just talked about in the previous slide is one way to help make sure that the AI strategy is a holistic part of the organization, taking into account the different aspects, whether it's on the cost side, the value creation side, the customer side, the employee side, making sure all of these different views and voices and perspectives are part of the strategic planning process. So a second trap is maintaining a long disconnected inventory of use cases, as we say here. So it's not just Okay, I mean, at the start, companies are going to be looking at AI implementation in isolated instances, but this very much goes along with the first trap, is seeing AI as a standalone initiative. It's also not just its own tool, own use case. It brings together value opportunities, new opportunities across the organization. The impact from one part of the value chain within a company is going to affect another part. So again, it needs to be seen as a holistic endeavor. Okay, a third area where companies, if the underlying process is inefficient or problematic or has too many steps to begin with, AI isn't going to make a bad process into a good one. So before looking at the AI tools and the programming, the agentic systems, and putting those in place, seeing what can change, the company really needs to think about the underlying process, the fundamentals. Here's what we are doing. Can we do this more efficient? Because AI, if it's applied to an inefficient process itself, is just potentially going to make the whole result more inefficient, right? So that's the third thing that companies often miss, but to first look at the underlying processes and make sure those are optimized. So a fourth and often common mistake is that assuming that the model, just having the model in place and having it produce output in a shorter period of time or whatever performance metric is, the point here is that that is not the competitive moat. Customers will be or competitors will be doing the same things in a short period of time if they're not doing it already, and that companies have to look beyond just the AI system itself to understand what is their competitive advantage. It needs to be combined with other areas of the business, and continually improving AI systems over time is also a key part of that, having the fast learning loops in place. So really what this is all about is making sure that a company thinks through thoroughly in terms of its AI planning, not only its AI strategy, but strategy as it is impacted by AI. So, understanding for a business what are its various opportunities to go to market and improve value for its customers because AI is available. And because AI is a tool in the organization, what sort of strategic options or what sort of levers can the company pull from a value creation perspective because AI is there? And from all of these various frameworks, then there are some questions that the strategy team can ask themselves or the senior management can ask themselves. I mean, how does Pestle change what matters most to the company? What activities and workflows should be redesigned? What customer job is changing or what new value is being enabled? Okay, these are all just, they're there. They're there for the analysis. But the key point here is that traditional frameworks, of course, do not necessarily predict what AI is going to use, but they're just as helpful to understanding the strategy and the strategic impact that AI will have on an organization. So we're looking to expose the assumptions, the debate over the company's structure, and to improve choices of the management under conditions of, especially now, very high uncertainty. So in this case, strategy is not the pursuit of technology. So not to confuse implementing AI with that being a strategy of the organization, but rather looking at how the AI tools will change the strategy of the organization by changing what's possible, by changing what can be done differently in the future. So that is the discipline of making choices about where and how to compete. Fundamentally, business strategy hasn't changed at all with AI, but AI is changing everything about business strategy because it's changing what the organization can do when it comes to the market, when it comes to their processes, their internal systems, and what value the employees are bringing to the organization across the board. Those are just examples. So I think this is a really fascinating study. I'm going to try to make some more videos on this topic because I just find it personally to be very interesting and watching very closely what is happening in the market, how things are changing, and I'm looking forward to talking more about that in the near future. Have a great day ahead. Thanks. Bye bye.